Hi there. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm going to be speaking about one of my favorite topics, the future of transportation. So a little bit about me and why I might have been asked to speak on this topic. As was introduced, I was the founding board member of Tesla Motors. I'm on the board right now of Zoox, a very exciting autonomous vehicle company. And I am also an investor with an all-female investor group, Broadway Angels, up here in the city. I also I'm on the board of the Computer History Museum, where we try to amplify and highlight the men and women who have really made the computer industry great and who have continued to innovate in the computer industry. And I'm also an advisor to Fei-Fei Li's AI for All, trying to get more diverse voices talking about the future of artificial intelligence. So, it is such an exciting time for transportation. You are seeing technology being applied to the transportation industry in all different kinds of ways. There has been a Cambrian explosion of new transportation modes and approaches, all driven and made possible by technology. Some are for the movement of goods, like the drones that you see up there and the delivery robots, and others are for getting people around so that they are not stuck in that horrible commute. Some are very close to commercial deployment. Others are going to take a while. Some you can get for a few $100s. Others require millions of dollars of investment in infrastructure, like the Hyperloop. The other exciting thing is you're seeing these deployed all around the world. So, for example, Zipline uses drones to deliver medicine in Africa to places that they're needed. Starship is starting with food deliveries in Europe, in Estonia, where it was founded. Hyperloop One and Hyperloop Transportation are talking to various governments in the Middle East, talking about perhaps some kind of Hyperloop between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. But, and one other one, Joby Aviation is also a company I visited that is trying to develop those VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing vehicles to get people perhaps between San Francisco and LA or other short commutes. Today, I'm going to focus on where I've spent most of my time and where I think we're all going to be impacted, which is in autonomous vehicles. I have the most firsthand experience, and I think it's going to have the most profound impact on our lives in the coming years. So I saw this cartoon recently, and I thought it was very funny because people have been fantasizing about autonomous vehicles for years, right? We had the Jetsons doing flying cars, and I saw this from the Saturday Evening Post in 1957, where we were all going to get together and play dominoes in the back of our cars as a family. I think it's a wonderful vision. The technology is very cool, and I'm very excited about it, but I think it's more important to understand how this technology can help society solve real, serious, dire human problems. And, as was also highlighted in the last panel, the current personal mobility system is completely broken. You know, we don't think about it. We say, this is how it is. Yeah, it takes me 2 hours to get from the peninsula up to San Francisco in the morning, but, you know, that's just how it is. What can I do about it? The system is plagued by failures, and I'm going to talk about the three main ones, which are human safety, environmental impact, and congestion. So starting with the first one, and again, I love data, and I think it's really important to really digest this profound data. Car accidents are one of the leading causes of death in the US and globally. 35,000 people died in traffic fatalities just in the US in 2015. The 2016 numbers haven't been finalized yet, but they are expecting them to be over 40,000, which would be close to a 15% growth in the last year in people dying every day in passenger vehicles in our cities and on our freeways. That is the equivalent of one passenger airliner falling out of the sky every week for a year. That's a death every 15 minutes, meaning 2 people will lose their lives during my talk. That is inexcusable. There are 3,500 deaths per day worldwide in worldwide traffic fatalities. The biggest figure I want you to take away from this talk is the one on the right. 94% of those crashes are attributable to human error or choice. This is why autonomous vehicles hold so much promise. They don't drink, they don't get sleepy, and they don't get distracted. These statistics were also shocking to me, this human error or choice. 51% of people still are not wearing seatbelts. How is that? We know that seatbelts save lives. 51% of the people that lost their lives last year in traffic fatalities were not wearing their seatbelt. Almost a third were alcohol-related, 25% were speeding, and that fatigue drowsy number that you see there is actually really underestimated because it's hard to know if the person was driving after the accident. It was hard to know if the person was drowsy after the accident happened. The figures are terrible. This is a real health crisis. And it's important to show these images to remind people every day that they need to be more careful and really think before they get behind the wheel. Every life lost is a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, a child, a friend, a colleague. This one was reported, if you read the report from the NTSB, there were 5 fatalities, 1 injury. It was a young girl who was going with a friend to pick up her first car, and they drove there, but obviously she was very inexperienced, and so they were on the phone with each other on the way back as they were driving back, and she hit an SUV with a mother and 3 children, and all 5 of them passed away. And as you read in the report, due to a combination of inexperience, unfamiliarity with the vehicle, speed, and distraction caused it. This just should never have happened. But getting even closer to home, I received this email about 3 weeks ago from a dear friend who used to work for me. And if you can read it, he says, "Laurie, I just wanted to let you know I was in a car accident in Pittsburgh, not extremely serious, but I fractured my left knee and leg. The driver had a seizure, lost control, and hit me at 60 miles an hour while I was standing on the sidewalk. I'm lucky to be alive for sure. The silver lining is I now have street cred when talking about how autonomous cars can prevent accidents." The car also took off at 60 miles an hour, hit him, and then went in and destroyed the front of a restaurant. You know, it's interesting how people say they're so scared of the robots taking over, but I'm actually far more scared of human drivers. So the second thing is, we heard a little bit, it's unsustainable. Our cities are becoming unlivable, and if you go to countries where they have a serious problem with pollution, you see this on the streets as well. 7 million deaths annually due to air pollution, 1.8 billion annual metric tons of CO2 in the US from emissions from the transportation sector, and almost half of the global oil demand is coming from automobiles and transportation. The shift to electric vehicles is finally becoming a big trend. It's early days, but in places like China, there's a strong push from the government. You have new companies starting, and hopefully we'll see a dent in emissions. You have companies like Volvo that is changing its entire fleet to electric vehicles, and that's really exciting. It's also very inefficient. 42 hours, annual hours in congestion for the average US consumer. That's an hour a day sitting in traffic for the average person. And then the other killer is your vehicles are only generally used 4% of the time. Sorry, that's an hour a day is the 4% of the time. The rest of the time it's sitting taking up parking places in our cities, blocking bike lanes. I like to bike on the weekends, and there are always a line of parked cars, so I have to go into the street and risk my life every day. We have garages, we have so much of our cities taken up with those parking garages. So now for the good news. We have a huge opportunity through the use of technology and new business model innovation to address these failures. So there are 2 main shifts. So going from the bottom left, you have the existing automotive companies who all realize that this trend is coming, and so they're trying to innovate. They have a 100-year-old model selling individual vehicles to passengers. And they know that there is a move towards shared vehicles. So over to the right, you have companies like Uber, Lyft, and Didi who are offering ride sharing so that at least those vehicles can be shared. But then at the same time, you have companies like Tesla and others trying to add autonomy and autonomous features to those passenger vehicles so that at least you're braking when you need to brake and you're staying in your lane on the freeway. But the best opportunity is combining both of those, moving to shared autonomous vehicles in the upper right, and that's the area that I'm most excited about. You have companies like Alphabet spinning off their new division Waymo, and then Zoox, where I'm on the board. And this is a very exciting opportunity. Now, why are you hearing so much about this in the press and in the mass media, and have so many entrepreneurs as well as large companies pursuing this, as well as VCs? Here's why. We have 1 billion cars on the road today, driving an average of 10,000 miles a year. That's 10 trillion miles. And if you say, okay, probably $1 a mile maybe is the cost of those vehicles, that's a $10 trillion market. So that's why people are so excited. It's one of the largest opportunities of our generation. It's 15% of global GDP. This is a huge opportunity for change. And so you see large and small companies taking notice. You have Google with Waymo. You have other technology companies like Intel acquiring Mobileye for $15.3 billion. You have new companies like Uber and Lyft that are growing. And then you have the large car companies like Toyota and Ford making huge billion-dollar investments just to start learning about it and getting up to speed. And it's not a single product that you buy. It's a change in the entire ecosystem. So there are going to be a lot of players and a lot of opportunities. There is an enormous activity for transformation across sectors. So let's talk about the other really cool thing about this is the impact is so far-reaching across the economy and society. It's one of the rare examples where an innovation influences second and third order industries and has effects far beyond its own industry of transportation. So I'm going to talk about 6 examples. First is it's very interesting. I've had a lot of media and entertainment companies calling me and saying, hey, if we now have people sitting in a car, couldn't we put big screens all around them and perhaps have virtual reality or augmented reality experiences or play full-length movies? Or do we need to change our media consumption to have shorter films that are designed to be shown in a vehicle while someone is commuting somewhere? So you have media companies thinking about this and thinking, wow, we're going to have people consuming content in their vehicles. What does that look like? Next, we have the insurance industry, and that's very interesting because if we now move to more technology in the car, we can collect all kinds of data on how the car is driving, much like Tesla started both with their over-the-air software updates as well as capturing so much data. And so then if the driving decision is moving from a human to technology, you have to change that whole concept of insuring a driver because you're now looking at insuring a product, and so you move into product liability law. So a complete change for the insurance industry. Hospitality, if you don't have a driver getting tired, do they need that roadside motel? And what happens to the rental car industry, which is going through a tremendous decline right now because people can grab their Lyft or their Uber or their Didi? Airlines, it's predicted that airlines are also potentially going to lose some demand as people can take other kinds of transportation. It may be quicker and more convenient to take some kind of autonomous vehicle to go from place to place. Real estate, hopefully we see less of those parking garages, certainly the ones that are going empty and even the ones that are full. And will property values change in outside suburbs when it becomes easier to get into the city during the day? Then the energy equation. Morgan Stanley just released a report saying that by 2050 they expect 80% of new car sales to be EVs and 57% of all vehicles on the road to be electric vehicles going forward. That's pretty exciting. Okay, so now that we've covered the basics, I want to provide some of my predictions that may not be common, and focusing on AVs and where I see this market going. So first, I think the vehicle is going to evolve just as much as we saw that huge transition from horse and carriage to our present internal combustion engine powered vehicle. There were early ideas saying, let's just get rid of the horse and we'll move the engine inside with the passengers, and there were all kinds of ideas. But if you notice, the present automobile doesn't look a lot like a horse and carriage. It was an entirely new architecture. And in the future, if you don't have that concept of a driver and an internal combustion engine, our vehicle that takes us around could look more like a robot, and we can completely re-envision what that technology is, what that vehicle is going around the city. The technology and use cases are completely different than today's automobile, and hence we can completely reimagine the architecture. Second, I think the first autonomous vehicle rollouts are going to happen in cities as ride-sharing applications, not in cars sold to customers. I think it's going to be a hard transition from someone to be sitting behind a steering wheel and trying to figure out, when do I take control of the wheel and when do I not? And now I own this robot, and what do I do with it? So I think it's really going to happen in a ride-sharing application, and there'll be fleets of ride-sharing companies that will be offering rides in autonomous vehicles. The 23 largest U.S. cities comprise over half of the U.S. GDP. So there's a huge opportunity for these to happen in cities to get people where they need to go and get rid of congestion. The development and deployment is going to be highly geography specific, and so it's the cities that embrace this technology and this service that I think are going to be the first to roll it out. And population density is key. If we're going to share a ride, you need to be on routes that a number of people are going to want to go in during the day. So I see the cities where there is more population to be a great opportunity for this technology. And you also see city dwellers buying fewer cars and using ride sharing more, so it's logical to see autonomous vehicles end up in those cities as well. So right now, you read a lot about the robotics and software technology that's going to be deployed in autonomous vehicles. And I think the technology issues certainly need to be solved. We need to figure out how to integrate all of those sensors and how to create a tremendous leapfrog in safety, redundant systems to make sure that these are very safe. And so there is a lot of focus on getting the technology right now, which is terrific. However, I think once the technology problems are solved, I think the focus will then shift to product differentiation, much like we saw with the mobile phone. We saw this with Apple, we saw this with Tesla, with the electric vehicle, and we saw this with companies like Virgin America in airlines, providing a better product experience. This technology also gives us the opportunity to completely reimagine our cities. As I think you heard from the last panel of mayors, to a tremendous extent, America's cities today are really designed around the car. We have freeways, we have gas stations, we have fast food, we have drive-throughs, we have suburbs. We've imagined the city based on personal ownership of a car. But now we have the opportunity to completely reimagine how our cities could be if we have fewer cars. We can have fewer parking lots. We can build the cities around humans rather than around cars and parking. In some cities, a third of the real estate is devoted to parking lots. Think about how we could turn those into green spaces and parks and bike lanes. The other uncommon prediction that I have, my final prediction, is in the area of regulations. A lot of people come up to me and say, well, wait a second, regulations always get in the way of innovation and government can never catch up, and so you're never, even if you get the technology right and the product experience right, you're going to be stopped by regulations. In the case of autonomous vehicles, there has been unbelievable good news, and if you don't know about it, you need to be very proud to be here in the US, where last year, in the last few years, the National Highway Traffic Safety administration came out with new guidelines for autonomous vehicles about exactly a year ago, and they are updating them right now. And just last week, the US House passed a bill with bipartisan support to legalize autonomous vehicles nationwide. That's huge. And that legislation has to go through the Senate, but could become law by the end of the year. There are also countries like Singapore where they are welcoming autonomous vehicle companies in and really want to embrace the technology and deploy it on roads. So that is really great news because autonomous vehicles matter because they offer the opportunity to improve safety, environment, and livability in cities, reduce congestion, improve mobility for everyone, including the elderly. And I really think it's one of the most exciting developments in our generation. I wanted to end, before I go to questions, on a personal story. So this is my mother on the left, and this is her Subaru on the right. And as my mother got older, it became very clear that she was no longer the safest driver. She loved to drive, but as she got on in years, my sisters and I were very concerned about having her driving on the road. And so we kept coming to her saying, hey, Mom, maybe we could sell your car, or maybe it's not so great for you to be driving. And that was an amorphous concept. And, she grew up with the automobile being her personal freedom and her independence. And so it was a very hard conversation. And in fact, every time we asked her, she got very, very upset. But my sisters and I knew that this was an accident waiting to happen. So fortunately, when my older son turned 15 and a half, I called her and I said, Mom, that 1999 Subaru that you drive, my son said it's his dream car. It's the only car that he wants to have is your 1999 Subaru. And my mother, being the most wonderful grandmother in the world, said, oh my goodness, if he wants my car, I have to let him have my car. How could I not? And so fortunately, her Subaru came and was given to my son. Now, I need to tell you about Old Sue, as we called her on the right. Not only did my older son drive her for 10 years, my younger son also drove her. We just had to have her towed off a couple of weeks ago, but she proved to be a total asset to the family. But think about if we could have gone to my mother and said, hey, instead of taking away your car keys, what we're giving you is the magic of being able to call a robot anytime you need to get around the city. And you can even invite your friends into the robot with you, and it'll be great, and it'll take you everywhere you need to go with the touch of a button. That would have been a wonderful way to end that story. So with that, thank you very much, and I would love to turn it over to questions. Yes.
Two questions. One is, Palo Alto's got a lot of, kind of get rid of the car initiatives, but you've got an issue with real far commuters. Talk about, coming from speaker. The people that commute from real far distances in the Bay Area specifically, because of the cost of living, you've got people commuting from Stockton and Modesto, et cetera. How do they get by in this kind of less car world? And the second piece is the commercial fleets in the cities to bring the food and the paper and everything else that comes in. How does that work in this kind of new city layout?
I think as we're seeing, there's a lot of investment, I'll take the second part first, in logistics optimization, and using robots to get people around in cities, I think, is pretty exciting. So those delivery robots, I think, hold tremendous promise for logistics within a city. For people that have longer distances to go, I would love to see a combination of public transportation as well as last mile. It really, to me, it's like a wireless network. We're here at GSM Mobile World Congress nearby, and I think you look at it like a wireless network. What's the long haul transportation provider and what's the last mile transportation provider, and working together. And it was interesting when I recently met with Joby Aviation. They said, we see ourselves as the long haul, but we'd love to have autonomous vehicles pick our passengers up on either end so that they have a fully autonomous ride. And I think the same thing is imagined with new technologies like the Hyperloop, but we should also see it with the train. My cousin happens to be CFO of Hornblower, the Hornblower yachts, ferries in New York, and he called me recently saying, hey, we want to work with the city to create an app to say, you take our ferry from one place, but then we automatically have someone picking you up to take you to your final destination. And I think we need to see cities embracing that combination of all those different transportation options, so a consumer just has to look at one app and click a button and they get from place to place using whatever combination of transportation is available in that city or in those suburbs. Other questions? Yes.
So my majors in undergrad was transportation engineering, and my final year project was about congestion mitigation. So my question is going to be targeted towards that. When we were out on the field actually trying to understand what leads to congestion, there's a lot of personal, human emotion involved in traffic all the time. How do you see autonomous vehicles entering into that space where people are already on the highway furious with the traffic, and now you have additional autonomous vehicles which are unmanned and might pose a threat, maybe? So how do you see that clash resolving?
You're absolutely right, and I think that's why it's very important to remember. Most consumers hate change. Most people are very scared of the new technology and the new change. And when the escalator and the elevator came out and autopilot on planes, there was incredible fear that came out, and I think you see that with any technology. So consumer education is very, very important. And I think for me, what really resonated was the safety aspect and getting those stories and seeing those crashes and seeing all the crashes along the freeway every day and thinking, oh my goodness, that could be one of my sons or one of my dear friends. So I think consumers have to process and think through, this is a much safer kind of transportation. I can transition to this. The price has to be a price that can afford people to take that as an option. It can't be for only the rich. So that, as we've seen with ride sharing, it's often at a price. You have a pooling option so that it makes it easy to never have a car. I have to tell you, neither of my two children have cars, and neither of them ever want to own a car. They actually see it as dangerous and have found that they can get around on their bike, or they can carpool with a friend, and that's absolutely fine for them. So I think, just like my mother was terrified of giving up her car keys, I think hopefully over time we'll be able to embrace it, and you can highlight, everybody in this room can highlight, it's safer, it's cleaner, it allows us to put green spaces in cities, and it's just better for people and better for the environment. Hi.
Thank you. That was really enlightening. My name is Yana Aranda. I'm here on behalf of an organization called Engineering for Change. We're a knowledge organization looking at the intersection of technology and global development. And one of the areas we look at is transportation. So you highlighted a lot of the trends and your vision for the United States here. It's really exciting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on other urban centers, especially in emerging economies, in continents like Africa, when we're talking about cities in South Africa, huge congestion, huge issues around mobility. If you could share your thoughts, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
It's a really important place for public-private partnership. And so I have to say, in the case of Zoox, they're going to go in cities that embrace them, right? They're not going to go in and force it. So I think it does take city, state, federal government to say, we're going to embrace this technology to solve the problem for our citizens and for our city and for livability. And so I know in the US there was the Smart City Challenge, which was looking at pilots to deploy this. Singapore has done this. In China, there's a tremendous investment from the government. And so I think this is a place where having the conversation and educating the lawmakers on the opportunity is going to be amazing. But it's happening faster than I expected. When I first got to know Zoox a few years ago, I thought, wow, this is going to be decades. I'm actually very surprised, first of all, that the US led the way in regulations, and then that the interest around the world is so tremendous. But the opportunity is there for any city in the world and for emerging markets. I would say China certainly is investing most rapidly right now in electric vehicles to get rid of the pollution and congestion in their cities, which are clogged, but I'm hoping to see more governments embrace it as well.
Hello, my name is Joyce Hunter, and I'm the CEO of Vulcan Enterprises. And I want to get your perspective on quality management and the regulatory side of this, and which side, how do you go about figuring out which area you should concentrate on?
In terms of?
In terms of the autonomous vehicle, looking at providing some quality management governance in those areas, as well as for regulation, how do you try and get policy to follow technology or technology to follow policy in a more efficient manner?
So as I said, first of all, when I met the founders of Zoox, I said, regulations are going to be really important. And most startups, you don't have the time, you don't have a policy person, you don't have time to go talk to lawmakers, and they don't really want to talk to startups, they want to talk to the big companies anyway. In this case, it was incredible. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration came to us, started meeting with us, even though we were a tiny little startup at the time, and started having regular conversations to say, hey, you guys seem to be very innovative. We'd really, really like to learn from you. And at the same time, we hired lots of folks from the aviation industry who had understood how to put in safety systems. And so resilience of different kinds of safety systems is absolutely critical. So first, I would say from a startup perspective, don't think it's too early to engage with policymakers. From a policymaker perspective, I would say don't just listen to those large companies that can afford lobbyists. Go find the innovators and learn and talk to them and see if there's a win-win by working together. And I think that's what we've seen in the US, which has been so exciting.
I was really fascinated with your prediction number 4 of the cityscape that you painted, and as an architect, that really excited me. I just wanted to tease that out a little bit more in terms of what you envision moving forward. Do you see AVs as a mechanism to bring people back into cities from the suburbs, or much like Ford did, do you see that enabling people to move out farther and farther away from cities and not really be clustered as we envision cities to be?
I think the wonderful thing is there will be choice. I think it really also depends on what the city planners design in their cities. If they make everything a green space where you can't have those vehicles going through the city and getting people place to place, and if they don't think about the architecture of their city to embrace that, it might be difficult to have those vehicles within the city, and it may make more sense for them to come from the suburbs to deliver people into the city. But the cities that look forward and think about, okay, if we're going to have less parking and we're going to have some autonomous vehicles on the street, how do we architect that to get around in the city? And again, I think population density is important, so it does tell me that we will probably deploy them in the city first, and then hopefully we'll have other public transportation methods for the long haul, just like we have Caltrain here to take us the long haul, going from the peninsula up to the city. But then when you get to the city, it's very important to have something for those short trips to get you around. So I really don't think it's an either or, and I think city planners should look at their city as a whole and say, how do I get everyone around where they need to go using the best combination of public and private transportation?
Thank you for your talk. I really liked it. I've noticed that among computer scientists, one of the most foremost subtopics of debate is ethics.
Yes.
In the field of autonomous vehicles. Do you have an idea of how companies are looking to shape law or just lawmaking policy around autonomous vehicles so to figure out who would take responsibility in the small case of an accident?
It's a great question, and I teased it out a little bit on insurance. What you're seeing with most of the advanced technology autonomous vehicle companies is they're treating this like product liability. So they are taking all responsibility if there is an accident because it is their technology. There's no driver involved. And so if you are truly delivering an autonomous vehicle, the company has to take all responsibility for any accident. On the ethical issue, there's a big philosophical debate on AI overall right now, and I think it's a worthy debate. I think with regards to autonomous vehicles, they really shouldn't be ever making ethical choices, right? You're using the sensors to ensure that you avoid all obstacles, whether they are people, bicyclists, dogs, buildings, squirrels. You need to make sure that you have redundant sensors around the entire vehicle to avoid any crash going forward. And the goal is 0 crashes. So that's why they can be more expensive, because you're using a combination of all different sensors to be able to handle any kind of weather, any kind of environment, dark or light, bright sunshine, or any others, to develop a truly safe, redundant system that is never having accidents. But you can't have people trying to make ethical decisions, and the software should not be interpreting ethical decisions. It just doesn't belong there. Just like you wouldn't say, I put in an automatic brake system, but I'm only going to brake for humans over 6 feet tall. I'm not going to brake for others. You know, a car should not be making those kinds of ethical choices. Any last questions? Okay, well, thank you for being such a wonderful audience.